for a noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the stories making the headlines at this hour. North Korea has fired yet another round of cruise missiles off the east coast. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch at around 9 a.m. Wednesday, and the military says it will closely coordinate with Washington to detect any more of Pyongyang's provocations. It's already the North's fifth launch of this kind this year. During an emergency economic meeting, Finance Minister Cheong Wa Dae shared the government's plans to initiate quantum computing-based cloud services later this year. Officials also shared their aims to invest more in emerging industries, including in urban air mobility. South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo has won gold in the 200-meter freestyle at the World Aquatics Championships in Qatar. Tuesday's victory places Hwang as the third South Korean swimmer to win a world title. He's also the first to have claimed a medal 3 straight times at the World Championships. We start with new rounds of missile launches by North Korea. Pyongyang fired several cruise missiles off its eastern coast near the port city of Wonsan. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch at around 9 a.m. Wednesday. Intelligence authorities here and in the U.S. are conducting a detailed analysis of the latest launch. The military added that it had been closely coordinating with Washington to monitor additional signs of North Korean provocations. North Korea has been dialing up tensions on the Korean peninsula with multiple test firings of cruise missiles since January. Members of South Korea's Navy and Marine Corps are heading to Thailand on Wednesday to join this year's annual multinational military exercise dubbed Cobra Gold. The Navy's 4,900-ton Dojokbong landing ship carrying some 330 personnel will join the exercise. The military exercise will take place from February 26th to March 8th. The South Korean military is mobilizing 6 assault amphibious vehicles, 2 K-55 self-propelled howitzers, and a K-77 fire direction center vehicle. A total of 7 countries, including the U.S. and Japan, are taking part, with China and India participating as observers. Jointly hosted by Thailand and U.S. militaries, Cobra Gold aims to boost multinational security commitments in the Asia-Pacific region, mainly for humanitarian and peace-related purposes. There are more evident signs that Pyongyang and Moscow are forging closer ties. Just last week, 100 Russian tourists visited Pyongyang on a ski trip. And North Korea recently sent a political delegation to visit Russia. Now eyes are on how the two countries are cooperating on various levels, from military to cultural exchanges. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
North Korea has opened its arms to tourists from Russia. According to a Facebook post by the Russian embassy in Pyongyang, 100 Russian tourists arrived in the North's capital on February 9th. The embassy said this was the first visit after North Korea opened its borders following a 4-year closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The tourists included representatives of the tourism industry and media and travelers from all over Russia, from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. It added the tourists will stay in the north for 4 days and get acquainted with key attractions in Pyongyang while visiting the Masikmyeong ski resort, known as one of the most modern major ski resorts the regime built. The recent hype in Pyongyang-Moscow exchanges hasn't stopped there. On Monday, a delegation of the regime's ruling party officials left Pyongyang to visit Russia. North Korea's official newspaper Rodong-Sinmun reported Tuesday that the delegation is on the trip at the invitation of Russia's ruling United Russia Party. The delegation plans to attend an international inter-party forum organized by the Russian party. A senior official at South Korea's Unification Ministry told reporters on Tuesday the government has no comment on ordinary interactions between Pyongyang and Moscow, but added that any illegal interactions such as arms transfers or labor dispatches will need to stop as they violate the UN Security Council resolutions. Moscow and Pyongyang have been strengthening ties ever since North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made a rare overseas trip to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin last September. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Moving on to the country's economic growth forecast, South Korea's economy is expected to expand 2.2% this year. That's according to the Korea Development Institute, which hasn't changed the rate from its earlier estimate. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin takes us beyond the digits.
The Korea Development Institute has maintained its economic outlook estimate for this year at 2.2%. In its revised forecast published Wednesday, the South Korean state-run economic think tank kept its outlook unchanged from its November 2023 estimate. The KDI, which typically releases economic outlook comprehensive reports in May and November, also released 2 additional revised forecasts in February and August last year to reflect the rapidly changing economic conditions. November's economic growth estimate for 2024 at 2.2% was slightly lower than the 2.3% forecast in May and August. The think tank has kept its estimate unchanged in this year's report as exports are expected to continue to see a recovery. Total exports were estimated to grow 4.7%, up from KDI's original forecast as the chip sector shows signs of improvement. Concerns about external factors are slightly mitigated as the International Monetary Fund last month raised economic outlooks for major economies from its previous estimate released in October last year. China's economic growth was adjusted upward on the back of government stimulus measures despite the ongoing real estate crisis in the country. And growth in the U.S. economy is expected to boost South Korea's exports. The IMF also upgraded its outlook for the world economy to 3.1%, pointing to a more resilient growth in the global economy this year. Domestic demand, however, continues to remain sluggish amid a recovery in exports and improvements in the global economy. For consumer inflation, the KDI revised downward its forecast slightly to 2.5% from 2.6%. And private spending, which was also adjusted downwards by 0.1%, is not expected to show drastic improvement anytime soon.
The current sluggishness in private consumption is attributed to the persisting high interest rates, hindering immediate improvement. It's unlikely to expect a boost in private consumption this year as high interest rates are likely to continue.
And risk factors from geopolitical tensions in the Middle East that could lead to rising oil prices and trade disruptions might also weaken South Korea's economic growth. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The South Korean government held an emergency economic meeting earlier today. There, officials announced plans to bolster emerging industries, including quantum computing and urban air mobility, also known as flying taxis. The country aims to also initiate quantum computing-based cloud services later this year. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
South Korea will launch a cloud service utilizing domestically developed quantum computers in the latter half of this year. That's according to plans to foster new growth industries, which were announced during an emergency economic meeting hosted by Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok on Wednesday.
The government will work towards creating tangible results in new growth industries, including mobility and biotech, which can serve as future pillars of our economy.
It will do so by launching cloud services using Korean-developed 20-qubit quantum computers. The plan includes developing related technologies to secure a 50-qubit quantum computing system by 2026 and a 1,000-qubit system by 2032. The higher the qubit count, the faster the processing speed and greater the accuracy. To take a step closer to achieving its goal of commercializing urban air mobility by 2025, the government is pushing to begin flight tests of UAM vehicles in metropolitan areas. It plans to provide tailored regulatory exemptions. Ongoing efforts are being made to establish an institutional framework, including safety standards, to achieve the commercialization of fully autonomous driving in 2027. The government has also pledged to further support key industries such as chips, displays, batteries, and shipbuilding. It is also expanding tax incentives for semiconductor-related technologies. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Another pledge made by the government is to make Korea's southern port city of Busan a global hub for business and logistics. President Yoon Suk-yeol reiterated this vision during the 11th round of policy discussions with members of the public. This time, discussions were held outside the capital, marking the first time ever. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
South Korea will enact a special law to turn the city of Busan into a global business hub as the country looks to narrow regional gaps and spur development across areas outside the capital. That's according to President Yoon Suk-yeol on Tuesday during the 11th round of policy discussions with citizens in the southern coastal city. Focusing on balanced regional development, Yoon extended a series of forums focusing on people's livelihoods to areas outside of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. Busan was the first stop, the very venue where Yoon last year pledged to usher in a local era, giving regional governments more regulatory freedom to shape policies when it comes to promoting business, creating commercial zones, education and cultural assets. With the aim of turning Busan into the country's second major city, Yoon said Busan would pursue 3 landmark policies to enhance people's livelihoods, boost jobs and economic activities, health and welfare services, with targeted education policies to nurture talent. He said the special law for Busan would aim to foster logistics, finance and high-tech sectors, establishing a new airport on Gadokdo Island by 2029, redeveloping the North Port, and relocating the Korea Development Bank to the city to boost financing, as well as develop a second Centum commercial district to foster startups. Also emphasizing education and cultural development, Yoon pledged to support childcare and education by backing the construction of a children's hospital in Busan, and also the city's major cultural industries such as film and sports. With the so-called Busan model as an example, he said efforts to develop non-capital areas would help overcome their shrinking demographics, as well as the country's chronically low birth rate.
진정한 지방 시대를 열어가기 위해서는 산업과 일자리만으로는 부족합니다. 교육, 의료, 문화를 비롯한 지역의 정주 여건을 확 바꿔서 삶의 질을 확실하게 높여야 합니다.
Earlier in the day, the president called on his secretaries to formulate tax incentives and subsidies for firms that develop policies that encourage employees to have children. South Korea's birth rate is the lowest in the world, currently at 0.78 children per woman, and is expected to further drop to around 0.6 this year. Asiana Airlines News.
Over in the U.S., the Consumer Price Index for January rose more than expected as high shelter prices weighed on consumers, marking a 3.1% increase. This data has jolted the stock market against bets that the Fed would start trimming rates in May. Yoon reports.
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported on Tuesday that the U.S. Consumer Price Index, a broad-based measure of the prices shoppers face for goods and services across the economy, increased 3.1% on year in January, which was above the market expectation of 2.9%. On month, inflation fell 0.3 percentage points from December's reading of 3.4%, which is much slower than expected. Excluding volatile food and energy prices, so-called core CPI accelerated 0.4% in January and was up 3.9% from a year ago, unchanged from December. Shelter prices contributed mainly to the increase, with the index rising 6% on year. Taking up about one-third of the CPI weighing, the index for shelter prices climbed 0.6% on the month. On a 12-month basis, shelter costs rose 6%. After closing at a new record high on Friday, the S&P 500 inched down 0.1% on Monday. And after the CPI inflation data was released, the S&P 500 fell sharply in Tuesday's stock market action, sliding a further 1.3%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sank more than 520 points, or 1.4%, on Tuesday, its worst one-day percentage decline since March 22, 2023. And the Nasdaq Composite fell 1.8%. Still, the big three indexes were trading higher on year. Fed officials expect inflation to recede back to their 2% annual target, largely because they expect shelter prices to decelerate through the year. But January's increase could be an obstacle for the central bank that's been looking to relax monetary policy, which is at its highest in more than 2 decades. Yoon, Arirang News.
The European Union has given conditional approval for the merger between Korean Air and Asiana Airlines. It took them 3 years to come up with this decision. The only thing left now is the United States approval. Choi Soo-young with more.
Korean Air's planned merger with Asiana Airlines got approval from the European Commission on Tuesday local time. The approval comes almost 3 years after Korean Air submitted its proposed acquisition of Asiana to the EU. Now, out of the 14 competition regulators, just one last approval from the United States is needed. However, the EU's approval is conditional due to the Commission's concerns that the merger could harm competition. As a result, Korean Air needs to remedy the EU's concerns in both passenger and cargo services. In passenger flights, Korean Air will enable rival airline T-Way, a low-cost carrier, to start flights between Incheon and Barcelona, Paris, Frankfurt and Rome. These 4 air routes overlap with Asiana. Also, Korean Air will divest Asiana's global cargo business. The air industry forecasts that the divestment will take place no later than October this year. The Commission said Korean Air can only implement the merger on Asiana upon full compliance with these remedies. The industry expects that the Commission's in-depth investigation for these approval will mark as a milestone for future mergers involving other airlines. As the approval from the US is still left to be done, Korean Air plans to finalize its merger procedure as soon as possible. If the US approves, Korean Air is expected to rank within the top 15 in the passenger services and within the top 10 in the cargo services globally. Cheong, Arirang News.
The United Nations has voiced concerns over Israel's ground offensive in Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah, where more than half of Gaza's population is sheltering from the war. Ahead of a Security Council meeting on Tuesday, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said he hopes for successful negotiations to avoid an all-out offensive over Rafah, which he says would have devastating consequences. On the same day, the UN's humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, warned that a ground invasion in Rafah could lead to a slaughter. Meanwhile, talks between the U.S., Egypt, Israel, and Qatar over a truce in Gaza reportedly ended without any progress on Tuesday. The New York Times says talks have been extended for 3 more days. South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo has won gold in the men's 200-meter freestyle at the World Championships in Qatar. His first-place finish makes him the first South Korean swimmer to win a medal at 3 consecutive World Championships. Lee Seung-jae with the story.
South Korean swimmer Hwang Sun-woo claimed the top podium spot on Tuesday after winning gold in the men's 200-meter freestyle event at the World Championships in Qatar. In the race at the Aspire Dome in Doha, Hwang finished in 1 minute 44.75 seconds ahead of Danas Rapsis of Lithuania and Luke Hobson of the United States. Hwang had the quickest reaction time off the blocks with 0.62 seconds and was ahead until the 150-meter mark when Hobson took the lead from the South Korean. Hwang, however, took over in the final stretch, passing Hobson in the final seconds to win his first career world title. His latest gold medal finish makes him the first South Korean to win a medal at 3 straight swimming world championships, as he won silver in the 200-meter freestyle 2 years ago and followed that up with a bronze last year. Hwang's medal was South Korea's 4th in Doha, the most the country has won at a single world championship. On Monday, Kim Woo-min won gold at the men's 400-meter freestyle, while South Korea picked up 2 bronze medals in diving. Hwang will now compete in the men's 100-meter freestyle event and the 4x200-meter freestyle relay with hopes of more medals in Doha. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
More on the cultural front. It's been nearly 2 years since Cheongwadae, South Korea's former presidential office, opened its doors to the public. And data from the Culture Ministry on Wednesday shows that over 5 million people have visited the site so far. Cheongwadae's visitor count passed 5 million last Saturday on Seolnar, also known as the Lunar New Year. The complex has been open to the public since May of 2022, and tickets are free and can be booked online.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. In the United States, the Senate on Tuesday passed a $95.34 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The Democratic-led Senate voted 70 to 29 in favor of the bill, passing the chamber's 60-vote threshold. The votes were cast just before sunrise after a group of conservatives who opposed the bill engaged in a 6-hour-long overnight filibuster. In the end, 22 Republican senators gave their support. The legislation will now move ahead to discover its fate in the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans. The aid package must be approved by both houses of Congress before President Biden can sign it into law. While President Biden welcomed the approval, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has previously criticized the legislation, saying the government is silent on the most pressing issue facing the U.S., referring to security problems at the country's southern border. Now to Indonesia, where voting is set to begin Wednesday for the country's general election. More than 204 million of the country's 270 million people are registered to vote and will be choosing not only their president and vice president, but also parliamentary and local representatives. With President Joko Widodo reaching the end of the maximum of 2 terms allowed, the race for the top position is well underway. Anies Baswedan, Prabowo Subianto, and Ganjar Pranowo are chasing the top job in the world's third largest democracy, alongside their respective running mates Muhaimin Iskandar, Gibran Rakabuming, and Mahfud MD. 54-year-old Baswedan and 55-year-old Pranowo are each former governors of Jakarta and Central Java, respectively, whereas the current defense minister Subianto is a former Special Forces commander. Subianto is running for the 3rd time amid criticism surrounding his running mate Rakabuming, who is the son of the incumbent president and, despite being under the legal age to run for office, has been given the green light by a constitutional court. In what the Indonesians call its festival of democracy, voting day is a public holiday. If no presidential candidate passes the 50% vote threshold, the top 2 candidates will compete in a runoff on June 26th. The new president will be sworn in on October 20th. In India, police fired tear gas and water cannons at protesting farmers marching the north of the country on the border of Punjab and Haryana states on Tuesday. Farmers, who form an influential voting bloc in India, are demanding that the government honors a promise made in 2021 regarding the setting of minimum crop prices. Dozens died in a year-long farmers' protest in 2020. Protesters are attempting to march towards Delhi, which the authorities have blocked with razor wire, cement blocks and fencing on 3 sides. This comes as Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeks a 3rd consecutive term in office at this year's general elections. A United Nations report released on Monday says nearly half of the world's migratory species are declining in population. According to the first ever State of the World's Migratory Species report prepared by the United Nations Environment Programme, about 44% of migratory species worldwide and more than a fifth of some 1,200 species monitored by the UN are threatened with extinction. Overexploitation and habitat loss due to human activity are cited as the main reasons. The report added that the biggest concern is the threat to migratory fish, with 97% of known species on the brink of extinction. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. A winter jacket might feel too warm today. Afternoon highs should go up even higher than Tuesday, soaring to 16 degrees in the capital. But there will be a sharp drop in ratings tomorrow with a wintry mix in store. Then lows will go back to below freezing by Friday morning. It's just cloudy in the capital area, but it's a rainy Wednesday for southern provinces. Jeju could see 10 to 40 millimeters of showers, while the rest of the south could see 5 to 20 millimeters of rainfall before it all lets up tonight. Afternoon highs are similar to slightly higher than yesterday at 17 degrees in Daejeon. Gyeongju, Jeju, Gwangju will see a high of 19 degrees this afternoon. Air quality will be normal to good all day with strong winds expected in the east of Gangwon-do province. Then a mix of rain and snow is in the forecast for tomorrow, starting from the capital and west of Gangwon-do province. And especially mountainous regions in Gangwon-do need to brace for heavy snow of up to 15 centimeters, and that will bring a brief wintry chill to the country on Friday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you at this hour. We'll bring you more stories from Korea and around the world at the same time tomorrow.